Okay. All right. So, hi, everybody, again. Um, Thank you for joining us for tonight's program on Revolutionary Era genealogy, finding where your family fits into America's fight for independence with April Lynn Earle. Um, April, I'm just going to let you go ahead
Great.
and
Thank you. Thank you for
start.
having me.
Sure.
So I have never presented on this topic before, so it's all new. But I've been doing my own family research for about 40 years now. I won't admit to the full number. We'll just say about 40. That's enough. Um, Tonight, I'm going to cover a brief history of the American Revolution, what it means to have participated in the war, researching your family tree during the revolution. And then I'll talk about records available from this particular period, how to access some of those records, and then joining a lineage society. And then there's some bonus secret stuff I didn't put on there that I'm going to tell you about. I have so much, so I hope this goes well. So the fighting for independence. This is what the map looked like in 1775. This yellow section on the left here would have been where Spain occupied. But then there is this line between the pink and the salmon. I don't know which one's which now that I'm giving them those names, but that was the proclamation line of 1763. It was a British boundary where they told those colonial settlements, this is as far as west as you could go. It was basically the Appalachian Mountain Range. And it was put there in place to reduce the amount of conflict with Native Americans. And then, of course, in that, I'm calling that salmon, in that salmon color, those were the 13 colonies. And you'll look, it's a little different, the geography, than it is on our modern maps. Some areas are completely the same and others are vastly different. I mean, if you look at New York, we did not go up to those Great Lakes at all. And geography becomes important because to find records, have to know where they were created. And so you have to know what area your family was in. So then I have this timeline. In 1765, this is the first time we get really boisterous about these rules that the British are imposing on us when the Stamp Act comes along. And this was a direct tax on the colonies, and we didn't like it. We did not like that. And so it takes a few years before we famously throw that British tea into the sea and have the Boston Tea Party in 1773, which is still years before Lexington and Concord occurs. And that is the first armed clash between British troops and the colonial militia, where we've kind of turned on ourselves. And then, of course, in 1776, we declare our independence. I downloaded my presentation to a PowerPoint and adjusted some of my things. So there's some overlap in the text. But people think that 1776 is our birthday because that's when we were independent. But really, it's only when we declared our independence. We weren't recognized as independent until many years later. In 1776, we have that famous painting of Washington crossing the Delaware. And this is a surprise attack that the Patriots led against the British forces. And it really shifted the morale of the war. And we gained great more strength at that point. And of course, there's what we often refer to as the turning point of the war is the victory at Saratoga, when the British General Burgoyne surrenders to the American forces, thereby convincing the French to become allies with us. And then, of course, it's several more years before we actually have the surrender at Yorktown. And both of those events occurred in New York, not far from where you are. And then we actually are recognized by Great Britain as officially being an independent country on September 3rd, 1783. But we don't celebrate September 3rd. We celebrate the day we had enough. We celebrate that July 4th, 1776. So the American Revolution was really a civil war, meaning that it was British colonists fighting against the British Crown and other British soldiers. Even though we were separated by that sea, we were really fighting against our own people. And so the colonies were really divided over this war. There were the revolutionaries, the patriots who wanted independence from the king, and then there were those loyalists who were colonists who wanted to remain loyal to the king. And of course, just like there are people now who want nothing to do with politics, there was this neutral group that, not everybody picked a side, not everybody fought with vigor against any imposing political fronts. They went with the flow as best they could. And participation doesn't necessarily mean that that person took up arms and got on a battlefield. It could be any sort of support that they gave service to either side. And I'll talk a little more about participation. So, of course, there's military service. That's the Army, the Navy, the local militia, the Minutemen you hear about. But then there are also non combatant military officers, um, drummers, and fife players we hear about who are responsible for some of the morale of our troops, as well as communication amongst troops, was sometimes done through drums and music. There were the engineers, artillery specialists, quartermasters who dealt with supplies, food, clothing, equipment. We had spies, we had scouts, couriers, messengers, surgeons, doctors, nurses, all these people who were involved in military service, but not actually picking up a gun. Then we also had civil and political government offices involved. Um, then there was camp support, people who were not soldiers, but helping with transportation, women cooking and laundering, and pharmacists supplying medication, and shipbuilders, people who were building things for the government to support the efforts on either side. And then, of course, there's the financial and supply, the people loaning money or donating or paying taxes to support the cause, and food and clothing and shelter, those things that those regiments need. So then switch this to genealogy. Who in your family participated in the revolution and on which side? So you need to be able to look into your family tree. And in order to do that, you have to really build a family tree that will reach back into the 1700s, right? You're looking for people who lived in the colonies from the 1760s to 1780s. If your family lived here then, they were undoubtedly impacted by the war, despite what side they were on. That war was impacting their day-to-day lives. So you have to build your tree. You can't just jump into the 1700s and think you're going to find an ancestor. You have to build a reliable family tree from yourself, moving backwards one generation at a time, from child to parent, until you're firmly in the 1700s, which in and of itself is a lot of work. And there's all sorts of resources that you can use in order to build that family tree. Everything on this list, I'm not going to read it all, but interviews with living family members, those family law that says, oh, our family was in the revolution. You want to look at census records and vital records and wills and city maps and directories, and linking each generation back into the 1700s. Now, this is my family tree. This goes back to my great great grandparents. And if we just look, like Abraham Earl was born in about 1849. We're not there yet. Like, you have to go much further. So I'm going to focus on this woman here. This is my great grandmother. They called her Mamie. Her real name was Mary Elizabeth Sharp. She married a Desjardins, who anglicized his name to Gardner. So I think of this branch of my family as French Canadian specifically. And so they're in Canada, right? I'm thinking Canada is loyalist. Like, when you lost the war, the British fled and they went to Canada. So I'm thinking I'm going to find a loyalist on Mamie's branch of the family. So as I push her tree back, this is her father's side, the Sharps. And I, looking closely at these dates, where was my family living and who was the right age to have served in that war? This chart, which is really my cheat sheet, I have it around all the time. This tells you the name of the US military conflict in the middle. And on the left, you're seeing the dates of the extent of that conflict. And on the right, we're looking at the dates of eligibility, like how old were these men who served in the American Revolution. Typically, military participation at this time was between the ages of 16 and 45. I mean, could they have been 14? Yeah. Could they have been 50? Yeah. But typically the age range was 16 to 45. And so for the American Revolution, they would have been born between 1730 and 1767 to have participated in that war. So I have a chart here for most of the conflicts between the American Revolution and the Vietnam War, and then the more modern day ones, which we changed the combat age after Vietnam to 18 to 35. So the date ranges shrink a little. But if anyone wants that, I can certainly send my slides to Allison. She can share those. But again, we're focusing on the American Revolution. So I'm looking at my tree for men living in the colonies between 1730, born between 1730 and 1767. And I'm zooming in on Mamie's father's side, and I can look at this group here. And all these men in red could have possibly been soldiers. And I'm going to zoom in on Daniel Moore. Now, I first encountered Daniel while I'm researching his children. He comes up as the name of as the father of his children. And when I start to research Daniel, I start at his death and I move backwards in time to his marriage, to his birth. And I find this on Find a Grave. He's buried in Old Bedford Cemetery in Bedford, New Hampshire. Now, Find a Grave, if you're not familiar with it, is a crowdsourced website. So the public can contribute information to this website about graves around the world. This is not a document. Find a Grave, it's not considered a document. However, headstones are considered documentation, even though there are many errors on headstones because typically they are erected after the death, sometimes long after the death. So in looking at this, I transcribed it because you can't possibly, if you can read that headstone from that image, you better eyes than I do. But I went to visit this headstone, and this is what it says. So it says, in memory of Colonel Daniel Moore. Colonel is what strikes me. And we go a little further and talk about the availability of records. So Daniel Moore, I start to look for records on ancestry.com. And these are all records that I found for Daniel, all the record sets that he came out. I found him in the US Federal Census. I found him in the US Revolutionary War Burial Index, abstracts of Revolutionary Patriots, New Hampshire wills and probate records. The history of Bedford, New Hampshire has a section on him. And then I found him in the Daughters of the American Revolution lineage books, as well as the Sons of the American Revolutionary lineage books. That is a SONS or an SAR application there. Now, the SAR are men who can prove that they are directly descended from someone who supported the American Revolution. Supported. They do not have to have participated in with a rifle. They could have supported in a number of ways as they went over. Now, the application is a multi-page document, and it provides a lineage from the applicant to the patriot and describes the patriot's service. So here is this application I found, and I'm really interested in the part that describes Daniel's service. And if I zoom in on that, there are, I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but these bulleted things will tell you the resources that the information came from. So Colonel Daniel Moore's appointment as commander of the 9th Regiment of the New Hampshire Militia in the Revolutionary War is recorded in Volume 7, page 577 of the Provincial Papers of New Hampshire. And then as you go down, these all mention places where there are records. So this resource is something I want to track down and look at the original of. But these are common types of records that are used to prove revolutionary service. You have muster rolls. Those are the official list of soldiers who showed up and were present. There are payrolls for who got paid because they showed up. Pension applications, something called bounty land applications and files. The government was granting land to veterans as a reward for their military service, and so there are records of that. There's rosters of the militias. There are enlistment records for each of the regiments, and then there are tax lists. There are supply receipts, court records, oath of allegiance, civil minutes from towns, privateer commissions. These are government letters authorizing private ownership, ships that were privately owned, to attack enemy vessels. So they weren't military ships. They do have ship logs, as well as letters and diaries and local histories that might exist. So I'm going back to this little thing that says Volume 7, page 577 of the Provincial Papers of New Hampshire. If you don't know about Family Search, you are missing out. Family Search is free, absolutely free. It's very expensive to subscribe to even the library edition of Ancestry.com. Ancestry.com is not the end-all be-all of genealogy databases. It is, however, much easier to use than Family Search. But Family Search, which is run by the Mormon Church, has far more records than Ancestry does. It's just not as easy to use. So you create an account for free. They'll never ask you for a credit card number. And then you can sign in. And once you're signed in, if you go under search, there's a place where you can search their catalog. And I searched the catalog for New Hampshire Provincial and State Papers, Volume 7, and it existed on Family Search. I click on View Inside, and I can look at it page by page. And this is page 577, where it states that Colonel Daniel Moore be appointed colonel of the regiment of the militia lately commanded by Colonel John Groff, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's where that application for the SAR got its information from, this particular notation. This is also, this came from the History of Bedford, New Hampshire, where it talks about Colonel Daniel Moore. And it said a really nice thing. I hope they remember me like this. It said he was a man of positive character, keen intelligence, remarkable memory, strong mind, and iron will, who allowed nothing to swerve him from his convictions of duty. Isn't that great? And then there's also down here this notation that says he engaged in mustering and paying the men. His service is best shown by orders to the officers of his regiment. So now I hit Ancestry. I go under their search. I find their card catalog. I put up here U.S. Revolutionary War into the search, and I find these compiled Revolutionary War military service records. And up comes all these Daniel Moores, and I'm zooming in on this one here in purple. When I click on that, it shows me this, Moore's Regiment, right? That's him in New Hampshire. When you click on View Image, I get back all these muster lists of him mustering and paying the payroll. And this little bit right here blew up. And if you can't read script, like many of my young graduate students can't read script anymore, shame on us. It says that he mustered and paid the men raised and paid, led by Daniel Moore, out of his regiment to march to New York and late the 19th day of December 1776. So after, this is before Saratoga, but we come to learn that Daniel Moore is present at the surrender of Burgoyne. I was also able to find this document where it states these are the staff rolls of Daniel Moore's regiment of volunteers, which marched from Bedford and adjacent towns to join the Northern forces of the Continental Army in 1777. And there's Daniel's signature on that document. So my assumption that Daniel and this line of Mamie's family had to be loyalists because they went to Canada was totally wrong. Daniel was a patriot. The reason his family wound up in Canada is because they received a land grant about 2 generations later, and they went to Canada. I'll show you a bit more about that. So in terms of accessing any of these records, you can get them through Ancestry, which is a subscription, or maybe you have the library edition at your library. And then there's Family Search, again, which you can use for free. There's also Fold3, which is it's a branch of Ancestry that's focused on military, again, subscription based. There's the National Archives, which you must order your documents from or make an appointment to attend. Sometimes state archives, historical societies, and the DAR's genealogical research system will have records. Talking about the DAR, if you're interested in joining lineage societies, there's a whole process. So there's the Sons of the American Revolution, which is founded in 1889, and it's for men 18 and older who can, again, prove their lineage directly to someone who fought in the American Revolution on the Patriot side. They have membership through a local chapter. This is their website, sar.org. Then there's the Daughters of the American Revolution that came shortly after the Sons. This is for women 18 and older, same thing, who can prove that they are descended from a patriot. In order to apply, you have to have vital records, the birth, marriage, and death records for at least 3 generations of your family, you, your parent, and your grandparents, in order to apply. And again, you apply through a local chapter. Even though there's a national organization, you have to find your local chapter to apply through them. So I joined, and people ask me all the time, why did you do it? There's lots of reasons people do it. I personally wanted this organization to approve my research. I wanted them to look at it and tell me I did it right. And that's what I wanted. But sometimes there's a prestige to proving your pedigree and your connection to these prominent historical families. Some of us wanted access to the genealogy library for free. Sometimes it's to socialize or to meet other people who you might be related to, or to do the charitable works that these organizations do. DAR provides service to veterans as well as scholarships to young women. So to join a lineage society, you first have to do your genealogy research and establish a line. Then you got to look at the application process, right? And you have to contact a local chapter so that they can help bring you into the organization. They will help you prepare your application. And then, of course, there's the documentation, which is the most important part. You have to carefully document your direct line, and you have to have documentation for every generation connecting you through that line. You must provide birth, marriage, and death record for every generation and their spouses. So when I applied, this is what mine looks like. I had to document from myself all the way back to Daniel Moore. All these people I had to have birth, death, and marriage records for, all of them. Um, and again, you need to document not just the dates, but the location. And for the Patriot, you need to supply the military service information that you have. Now, if you had a qualifying someone in your family tree already a member of the DAR, like let's say your grandmother was already a member of the DAR, you can just document yourself back to grandma and then supply her membership number. That's pretty much all you have to do. But in my case, no one in my line had ever been in the DAR. Other descendants, other lines of Daniel's family had been. So he was an accepted patriot, but I still had to document every generation. And again, that's a lot. So in your research, you've acquired all sorts of documentation to establish your claim of descent, and then you have to present it with the Patriot Service, right? What if you don't have primary sources, right? Maybe you don't have birth certificates. So most societies want the primary source, but they'll accept those secondary documentations. So one document does not substantiate a fact, but a primary source will take precedence over those secondary sources. So what happens when you don't have the actual certificate? That's when you rely on those secondary sources. And this slide here just defines what a primary source is as opposed to a secondary source. Again, a primary source is something that was created at the time of the event, like a birth certificate. A secondary source is one that's typically created long after the fact, like you have a written family history that will state their birthday or where they lived, but you don't have the birth certificate. You don't, I hear this a lot. You don't have a birth certificate for your third great grandfather. He was born in New York State in 1875. Well, there's a couple reasons you don't have a New York State didn't have birth certificates until 1881. So there's a couple things you can do. You can find all the census records he was in. You can bring forward his death certificate that states his birth, or you can have a family Bible that had a page that recorded his birth. And all that secondary stuff helps to replace the absence of that primary source. I don't know why I keep showing you that. Okay, so this was my surprise thing. I started to dig into family trees and, can you have both patriots and loyalists in your family tree? And there's this, Norman Rockwell painting of the family tree, and you can see you got some people over here, little pirates and blue and gray in the Civil War. So yeah, you can get a mix of all sorts of stuff in your family history. So I went back to Mamie's family tree and I now looked at her mother's side, and I was looking around for men who would have been in that right date, right? And I see this Donald McLean, lieutenant. And then I started to look around. Now, loyalist records are typically held by the British Crown, but you could track them down in the US and Canada as well. Because again, when they lost the war, they went to Canada, where there was a British stronghold. So you can still track down the military service rolls, muster rolls, land grants, and claims for financial loss for loyalists as well. And there are a few sites that you can look at. There's Ancestry, Family Search, Fold3. But there's also this Library and Archives of Canada. Now, this is the central repository for Canadian Loyalist records, and they have indexed and digitized databases. An important record set like the Ward Chipman muster rolls and the Carleton papers. Those were papers of the British headquarters. So I have a URL there, which you're welcome to take a screenshot of. But again, I'll send this presentation to Allison. I first encountered Donald while I was researching his children. where he's named as the father, just as I did with Daniel. And when I started to research Donald, I did the same thing. I started with his death and I moved backwards in time. So first his death, and then his marriage, and then his birth. And this is Find a Grave for Donald. I see this. He's Lieutenant Donald McLean on his headstone. And one of the cool things I see is if you look down here, this is his wife buried with him. Susanna Haney is her maiden name. His wife died May 19th, 1868, I think it is. And she was 108 years old and 5 months. And I thought, that's wrong. It's not. Um, she lived to be 108. This is her obituary. And you'll see up here, it says in her 109th year of age, she had not yet turned 109, widow of the late Donald McLean, lieutenant of the 74th Regiment of Foot, which, if you go on to read this, was involved at Fort George, which is in Maine, located in Maine. It was an early battle that embarrassed Paul Revere, who was the American force there, and British kicked their butts, man. So I start to dig around looking for Susan Haney, married to Donald McLean, and I find this on Ancestry, some U.S. family history book for the clan Gillian. And I go in to read, and there is this section. Donald, the eldest son of Hector of Killian, was a lieutenant in the 74th Regiment. That's my guy. And if you go down further, you see here he received a land grant of 2,600 acres on the St. Francis River in Quebec and settled it. I reached out to some military experts and asked them, have they heard of land grants that large? And they had not. So I went back to the Library and Archives of Canada, which is information I presented earlier. But there's also this Land Petitions of Lower Canada in the Library and Archives of Canada. And when I went there, I searched for Donald McLean. And over here, I mean, I had 4,700 results. I was able to use the facets on the left-hand side to narrow it down to what I was looking for. And I came across this record, 90 digital objects in it. I'm not going to show them to you all because we don't have that kind of time. But these are some of the pages. And one of the most interesting pieces in it now, it lists his children. These are Donald McLean's children, and I can see right in there my Archibald McLean. And this is them. And Donald's signature is down here. I didn't highlight it. It's down here. And this is his land grant for 2,600 acres on the St. Francis River in Quebec. So again, there are some other places to look for Loyalist records, including the American Loyalist Claims and Compensations. I mean, because after the Revolution, many of the Loyalists had lost so much of their property. It was confiscated by the Patriots, by the Americans, and they had nowhere to go. So they turned to their government and said, look what I sacrificed for you. And they applied for support from the British government. Many of them received it. Many of them went to Canada. And again, there's another database called American Loyalist Claims on Ancestry. Here are some others. Loyalist Collections, which brings together links to Loyalist resources from multiple institutions related to Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. There's the United Empire Loyalist Association of Canada's research resources. And this links Loyalist to Loyalist directories, muster lists, branch libraries with online catalogs. There's the Carleton's Loyalist Index, which is a searchable index to name the British officers involved and mentioned in headquarters papers. There's the Online Institute for additional advanced Loyalist studies to provide some historical context to what was going on. There's also, just like you can join the DAR, you want to be proud of your Loyalist ancestry, you can apply to the United Empire Loyalist Association of Canada, which I have not yet because I didn't discover my Loyalists until I started putting this presentation together. But I'm going to apply. So I don't know if the DAR will throw me out once they find out, but I'm going to join. It's an association for the descendants of American Loyalists who supported the British during the Revolution and often resettled in Canada. And although it's Canada based, many of its members actually live in the United States and other countries. Membership is open to people who can document their Loyalist descent. And just like the DAR application, you have to document every generation back through all those vital statistics and then prove what you have on their service, on your Loyalist service. So you apply for a Loyalist certificate of descent, which requires, again, proving the service of your original Loyalist. And with that, first you have to build a verified family tree back to the 1700s before you can research your revolutionary connections. That's a must. Once you're there, you use records, including but not limited to census, vital records, wills, military documentation, local history, published family history. You're going to work backwards through time. Often the first hint lies in how the individual is recorded on their headstone. In both cases, that was where I discovered they had a military connection. And then through their wills and their obituaries, it will state often that they participated in the revolution. And Revolutionary War records are accessible through Ancestry, Family Search, Fold 3, National and State Archives, as well as some historical societies. You use secondary sources like published histories to help you track down the primary sources. I use that SAR application to find those mentions in those historical documents in New Hampshire. So your ancestor could have participated in a variety of ways on either side. But if you can prove your descent from a patriot or a loyalist, you should consider joining a lineage society like the DAR, SAR, not only for the recognition and research opportunities, but for that sense of community. I think that's the most valuable sense of belonging I get is from participating in my DAR meetings. And with that, if you have any questions or want me to go back to a slide to discuss something, I'm more than happy to.
So you can go ahead and unmute if you have any questions.
Let me see, there's the chat. You're very welcome. Silence.
It was a lot of information.
It is a lot of information.
Yeah. And I was just curious how well the records were kept for service members or non-service members during the revolution. So it's clear that they've kept a lot of records.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it was a big deal on both sides. And so both sides made a lot of records and preserved a lot of records.
Yeah.
Which is nice. You know, there are some conflicts where very little gets recorded. And especially on more recent military actions, you have to rely a little more on newspapers to get information. But there are a lot of records out there. And one of the things I didn't touch on is the participation of women in the American Revolution, which absolutely existed. There are the few stories of women dressing up and pretending to be male so they could be in the fight, but they were also nurses on battlefields and cooking
Mhm.
and cleaning for regiments and moving with their husbands' units in battle. So they also were out there.
Yeah. Well,
And here I was afraid I wouldn't get through it all.
yeah.
Hey, I got time to spare.
Yeah. Um, so did you discover absolute, I guess, especially the loyals thing, what was the most surprising thing that you learned in your researching for this?
That large a land grant, how large a land grant he received.
Hmm.
I mean, 2,600 acres is huge. That is a huge, it's like my town, half a town,
Yeah.
Um, and it was simply because of his service.
Yeah.
And I read a book, a fiction, historical fiction book, um, based on the battle that he was in the Penobscot expedition. It was
Hmm.
called The Fort, and it was about Fort George. And in it, it mentions the Haney family in this historical fiction, which
Oh,
is
that's so funny.
his family. He marries the Haney family. So that was kind of exciting that even though fictionalized, like my family's mentioned in that, it was significant enough for that author to include that. So it was kind of cool.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Yeah, it's kind of a boring
Um,
book, but you got to be into battles
yeah.
to enjoy it.
Um,
But I
yeah.
enjoyed my research into it, and it was a line
Yeah.
I hadn't explored. So I'm grateful you asked me to look at the revolution.
Yeah. I think with the um the celebration coming up, I know there is a lot of interest um out there about the
Yeah.
revolution. Yeah. So
And a lot of the battles took place in New Jersey. I mean,
yeah.
so,
Yeah. I got to see Washington crossing the Delaware on Christmas. I Because I live by Washington Crossing. I used to
oh,
live
how
by Washington
interesting.
Crossing. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. 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 So,
Well, if
um,
you share the recording and anyone
I-
comes up with any questions, I'm happy to answer them after the fact too.
okay, that would be fantastic. Thank you so much.
Of
And
course.
again, we're going to have this recorded, so it will be on our website probably within the next day or two.
Great.
So,
Thank you.
okay. All right. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for your participation this evening. I hope you learned a lot of information and you can start your own research. So thank you again, April,
Of course.
um, for doing this for us. And yeah, thank you. Okay.